Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to helping business owners prepare for exit so you can maximize value and exit on your terms. This is the Exit Insights podcast presented by Succession Plus and Capitalize. I'm Daryl Bates-Brownsword, and today I've got a special guest, Michael Brosowski. Now we talk about this podcast about preparing businesses for exit. Now, Michael's got something a little bit special. He's actually the CEO, or was the CEO, of a not-for-profit, and is just sharing his story around his experience around preparing and getting ready to exit a not-for-profit. So welcome, Michael. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Daryl. It's good to be talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. So, Michael, we've had a bit of a preparation conversation, and I think when we started, it was kind of, does this journey work for for the podcast? And when we dug into it a bit, it's exactly the same story, exactly the same journey. So, why don't you give us a little bit of a background? And because I think the story goes back to, was it 2015?
Well, yes, my exit story goes back to then. The story of the charity goes back a lot further. And to explain, I'm living in Vietnam, so I'm speaking to you from Hanoi. Where I've been living here for 21 years, in fact. I moved here as an English teacher in a university, and I started this non-profit called Blue Dragon Children's Foundation. So we've been running all these years. We started out as a couple of volunteers, just trying to help some street kids. Eventually became a little bit more professional and had some plans. Got involved also in human trafficking and how to end that. And the organization has just kept on rolling from strength to strength. Then in about 2015, I decided it was time for me to go. It was time for me. I wanted to stay with the organization. I love the organization. I can't imagine being in a different organization, but it was time for me to step out of being the CEO role. Unfortunately for me, a lot of the push factor behind me there was negative. I was burnt out. I was stressed. And so I didn't plan very well at all. And it burnt up and went badly. I came back into the role about a year later, and I stayed in that role for about another 6 years until giving me time to get it right and to hand over the CEO reign to someone else. I'm still now with the organization with a different title. I call myself the strategic director, which gives me a lot of flexibility in what I do, but I'm happily not a CEO.
So let's unpick that, because I know you just gave us a background and the headline, but there's just so much in that. So the first thing, if I may, is you almost glossed over what the Blue Dragon does, and can you just share a little more about it? Because you brought me to tears when you told me about it the first time around, and normally I don't dig into the actual product, but this is pretty special what you're involved in.
Yeah, it is pretty special. Thank you, Daryl. And maybe when I tell that story, people will understand why I might have been burnt out once upon a time. It's happened more than once. But we work with young people who have been trafficked. Now that includes kids who are here on the streets of Hanoi, but who are exploited, sometimes sexually or sometimes for their labor. And it includes girls and women and boys and men as well, who are trafficked out of Vietnam into neighboring countries. So, for example, a very big issue we've been working on in recent years has been the trafficking of Vietnamese girls and women into China, where they're sold as brides. And more recently, we've been working on the issue of Vietnamese girls and women being trafficked into northern Myanmar, where they're sold into brothels. Now, I say we work on the issue. We work quite directly on the issue. So we conduct rescue operations where people have called for help, and we send teams to find them and get them out. It's non-confrontational. It's not Batman stuff that we're talking about. It's conducting a safe operation to get people out of danger back to Vietnam. And then we work with the police, we work with the government, with the judicial system. We have psychologists helping people recover from that ordeal, and also looking at the big picture of how do we stop this all together. So it's a very broad scope that we have. We start in the dirt, getting our hands dirty, dealing with direct issues, and then we're working with the government on how do we change the law to help people more. So there's a lot of moving parts in Blue Dragon.
And just so thank you for sharing that. It's like it's special work you do. So thanks for doing it. And to think about it from a business perspective, you can see that for any entrepreneur, any business owner, the fact that this is a not for profit is kind of irrelevant now, because it started with a single person with a vision who saw a problem to be solved, and went about doing what they needed to do to solve that problem. That's just like any entrepreneur brings a product to market, they see a need that needs to be met, and they figure out a commercial arrangement to make it work. They then got to deal with all the moving parts of going, well, how do I make it happen? How do I provide solutions? How do I keep my customers happy? How do I get my suppliers? How do I recruit? How do I inspire people to want to share the vision of what I want to create? And then people go, you know what? I want to be part of that. And then how do they get involved? Which is just like the recruitment journey of anyone. Like whenever a business owner starts a new business, starts an enterprise, they've got to inspire people to want to join them, because ultimately they're leaving something to join with you, and the only reason they'll do that is because they're inspired by whatever it is you're creating.
That's right. That's a really good way of looking at it. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So you've got all the energy, which is now I'm going to say human resources, but I actually really dislike that language of human resources, because it distills down to treating people as resources, and they're not resources, they're people. So it's
they're people.
Talent management issues that you've got, and you've got to keep them energized, and those that have come on board who are aligned to your vision, they come on board because they want to be part of something bigger than themselves, and they want to be part of something meaningful and has purpose. And that's true for everyone, whether they're building a new house or whatever job they're doing. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves and something meaningful. And one of the other principles, I guess, of talent management is that people crave good leadership, and regardless of what level of leadership they're in themselves, they still crave good leadership. So all of these principles, these human elements, if you like, apply regardless of the organization you're in. So you've been building this organization. You got to a stage where at some point you're stressed, you're burnt out, you're frustrated, you just needed to get out at any cost. And I can see a whole lot of business owners, putting their hands up and going, yeah, well, I've been there. And a lot of business owners do walk away and exit their business at that point, and some actually do a transaction and sell. And it's the worst time to sell, the advice we give them, because a business that's in that state is at its lowest value. So you, like a normal human entrepreneur, has gone, well, I needed to get out. And I think the words you said to me earlier was, I gave it to the first person who walked by, effectively and unfairly, said, here, it's yours, I'm out, go for it. So talk us through that. What happened? How did you convince that person that they should take the reins, and what was the fallout? Talk us through that so that so people can relate and get a bit of a feel.
Yeah, and to be really honest, that relationship ended really badly, and I don't want to dump on this other person, a woman who took over the reins. She did her best at the time. Our relationship in the end was pretty poor. Until my board stepped in and rectified it, and at that point the new CEO left. But I definitely don't mean to point the finger at her and say it was all her fault. As you said, I was kind of just looking for anyone, any takers at all, and she was keen. She was already in the organization. She was ambitious and wanted to take the role on. When I look back, deep down I had some misgivings. Like I just wasn't sure this really is the right person. But I actively quelled that little voice at the back of my head, because I felt I needed them to do it. And another voice was saying to me, "Come on, what could go wrong? How bad could it get?" But as I say, things turned toxic. Simply, as an organization, we were not ready for it. And I'm in a situation where my governing board is in Australia. And so they were very helpful. I was on the phone to them all the time, as was the CEO. But them not being on the ground here and only able to kind of ascertain what was going on over phone calls, their hands were a little bit tied. And I really wish, looking back, that I'd had someone right there beside both of us, beside me and the CEO, to walk us through it and to be more of a sounding board. I needed that. My board did a fantastic job, but their hands were tied because of distance. So the CEO, after a year, decided that she would go. She also was really unhappy, and I stepped back into the role, thinking I'll just do this for 6 months. But it became clear that the organization needed a lot more than that to be ready for a proper transition.
So already, Michael, you've highlighted two what I think are really important messages. The first one being that, hey, look, the organisation wasn't ready, and with the CEO who, and if I'm reading between the lines, was calling the shots, was the whole organisation was effectively revolving around the key inspirational person, the founder of the organisation, which is not uncommon. They were then in a position where they've gone, I've got to get out of here, and they, without any preparation, just sort of, and what we tend to do is we assume that people understand what's going on, but as a founder CEO, who's often control freaks, the organisation is revolving around us, and we assume that everyone knows what's going on. But in this case, the downside of what happens when we hand over without preparation. So there's the first lesson, and what I hear is you saying, "Hey, look, I take responsibility. I could have done that better."
Yes.
The other really important message I heard in just that short part of your sharing was that the value of a good board. Like the good board is third, not quite third party, but a step away from the organisation, so they can act in an independent, unattached role, and they were able to work with both of you and perhaps remedy a whole lot of what was going on. Whereas without the board, it could have just got really messy. So the value of having a good board that understands the business to keep things on track and guide and steer the leadership team when things aren't going so well.
Exactly, that's right. The board there, that was the time that the board had the most value. Although, of course, I've now been through exiting a second time, and this time the board has really been. They've got the experience now. We've been through this. We've learned, and they could really support me through it very, very well.
Brilliant. So you step back in your mind, was it 6 months? I'll just come in, I'll sort this out, I'll clean things up, and then I'll exit again, was the thinking at the time. When you jump back in, what did you think needed doing? What did you think you were going to be doing for 6 months?
Well, right at the outset, I thought that I would be just sort of resetting the organization's culture and values, because during that year, that was kind of what had shifted. You talked before about people being part of any organization because it matches with their values, especially in a non-profit. People may sacrifice a lot of opportunity and especially the opportunity for a much better salary to stay with an organization because they really believe in the direction that it's going. During that year, we went off in some other directions, and some of the longest serving staff who had made the most sacrifice over the years were starting to feel this isn't the organization that I joined. And so I thought it was kind of a relatively simple matter of coming back in and saying, okay, let's just remind ourselves of what our values are. But that was where I could see that there was actually a lot more work to do, and it was going to take a lot more time. And so, as I say, that 6 months turned into some years before the organization was really ready for me to comfortably step out, and with time, not in any rush at all, but work it out, find the right person, and step out in to make sure it went well, which it has. It's gone very well this time.
So now we're starting to talk about the importance of everyone understanding what the vision and the direction and the purpose of the organization is, whether we use language like the purpose or mission or what have you. But why does the organization exist? We assume as the leaders that people understand that, but unless we're sharing that message and sending it out regularly, then we can't assume that people understand it. So it sounds like, if I'm understanding that the new CEO came in and there just wasn't that common understanding of the whole reason that the organization existed in the first place, and that the values were embedded and go, this is the glue that holds it all together. This is our style. This is what makes it special, and we all understand that because we have had those conversations.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I often think of another organization that I know here in Vietnam that has been through a few changes in leadership over the years, just for natural, purposes, people moving on. And every time they get a new CEO, they're a different organization. Now, that was what was actually happening to Blue Dragon. And I could see that firsthand. So and a lot of people around me, we had in mind that this is what Blue Dragon is, but none of that was documented. And therefore, another person could come in and change it because there was nothing to say that they couldn't. Now, in any organization, even the mission statement can evolve over time. Ours has recently evolved. Culture can change. Strategy can change. So when a person in my position, especially as a founder, but even just as a CEO, wants to step aside, well, I want to make sure that things are maintained, that culture, the mission continues, but it can change. That's fine. And a CEO, I think, needs to acknowledge that and be comfortable with that. The question is, how does it change? Is it one person at the top of the organization says, well, this is different now? Because that's not okay. And listening to other people who you've interviewed, Daryl, where people leaving a company and they want to make sure that they're leaving something particular. That's normal, and it's the same in a nonprofit. Perhaps it's even a stronger impulse in a nonprofit because people have put in, a sacrifice. It's not quite, well, Blue Dragon has changed now, so I'll go and work at that other organization. There's more commitment, there's more skin in the game in a nonprofit. But that was the problem that we faced, that one person was able to say, right, I'm the boss, so now things are different, without any kind of a process for everybody to be on board with that.
Not non-profits, definitely. I think the underlying difference with a non-profit to a commercial business is that people are really believe in the cause and they're consciously making that sacrifice of, yes, I understand I'm taking less cash, but I really believe in the cause. I'm making a difference. Whereas when people move from one business to another, they may be earning more or less in a different business, but it's not always a conscious transactional arrangement. Okay, so you're
That's
in
right.
there, you're becoming aware that, hey, look, we're not all aligned to the same vision. There's not this common understanding of what the cause is and what we're working towards. I need to reintroduce that and bring it back to the forefront of people's minds. And then, you started coming in going, hey, I'm here for 6 months, and I think you were there another 5 years.
Yeah.
So what changed for you to realize that, okay, so it's more than just a quick fix that's required? What else did you find yourself working on to prepare the organization so that this time it really would be ready for some form of succession, but also not lose track of where it's going and why it exists, so that everything really was foundational and kept the organization going? So, because we did touch on the legacy, and we might be able to explore what a legacy is a bit later in the conversation.
Yeah. Well, look, this second time around, when I came back in as the CEO again, I was very, very fortunate to have some good mentors, and several, not only one, several, and some of their ideas, by the way, were very different to each other. Some particular supporters that we have are actually some brothers in Australia, the Everett brothers, and one of them is from an accounting and finance background. The other is from an organizational leadership background, and their ideas could not be more polar. It's quite amusing getting these brothers together and chatting about what direction an organization should take. I had input like that from the board as well. So the board spent time over here with us, really hands-on. And then one of the key things was turning to the whole organization. We had about 60 staff at that time. And it dawned on me, after all these years of leading this organization, it dawned on me, well, actually, here are 60 amazing people who need to have a meaningful and proper role in talking about the future of the organization. And so I was able to find there were a couple of key people within the organization who were champions of this change process. And that was all we needed, just a couple of people in different roles to work alongside with me. And, we were fully aligned. We didn't always know where we were going, but we were fully aligned that something had been lost and we needed to get it back and then go even beyond that, not just get back what we had, but really thrive and really define as an organization what we were and what we were going to do. So getting all this external advice, then having these internal champions alongside me, we would get staff together in a few different kind of forums. Sometimes it would be whole staff meetings, or it might be inviting people who'd like to join a discussion group about this. And we would sit and discuss. We would throw out some crazy ideas sometimes, and get feedback. We would ask people for their crazy ideas. And the more we did that, the more we could see, oh, actually, there's even more to do. It's like when you think you're repairing the car. I've just got to turn this little bolt here, and then you realize, oh, hang on, I'm replacing the motor now. And that was what we did. So, we realized, well, we need a succession plan, right? Where do we get a succession plan from? How do you create one of those? How do we define our culture? Because we felt during that year, we really felt that the organization's culture had shifted in a very short time, an amazingly short time. Everything that the core group of us thought about Blue Dragon's culture totally changed. Unbelievable. We never thought that could happen. So how do we define the culture? And these are big jobs. These aren't something to kick off in 6 months, especially if you're going to collaborate. So I didn't want to lock myself in a room and write up a whole bunch of documents and then email them to everyone and say, rightio, here we are. We've got these. Now let's advertise for a CEO. I needed the whole organization to be with me on that, to be writing those documents with me, to be challenging me on my ideas, but for them to own what we were creating. Guides that set the boundaries on how our leaders should operate. So it defines our view of leadership. We've got documents defining our culture, and all of these, by the way, in one way, like they're just pieces of paper, and they're only as good as we really put them to use. But we also built in processes to the organization to make sure that this is part of our culture. So not only do we have those documents, but those documents are part of our charter with our board. So fulfilling those documents, which sometimes some of them are quite aspirational, as much as they are practical, fulfilling them is part of our charter. So a CEO can get fired for not fulfilling them. We really made them a core of the organization, not a nice little thing on the side. And so that's what took years, Daryl, rather than 6 months.
So if I'm understanding, what you did is you've gone, okay, so recognizing that there was a disconnect between understanding of the why, maybe what and how of the organization, why it exists and what it's trying to achieve. And then therefore various people are getting involved in different projects about how they're going about doing things. And each project in isolation seemed like a good idea at the time.
Mm.
So therefore the new CEO came in and thought, oh, well, here's a good project. I like the sound of that. Let's go off and do that. And we go, hang on a sec, that doesn't fit with our reason for being. And well, what is our reason for being? I don't know. I've assumed it. You've focused on going, okay, so let's get documented about why people have joined us and what it is we believe in and what our cause is. Let's have a common understanding. So therefore, we're already an existing organization, and we're not a startup. So recognizing that culture is fueled by the top. I think the Chinese have a proverb says the fish rots from the head.
Mm-hmm.
In a small organization, everything starts from the top down, and especially culture. So culture is our behaviors in action and our beliefs expressed through our behaviors. And we can't change those. We can inform them, but our beliefs drive our behaviors. So we're getting clear about what they are, and so that we can go, look, if you believe in this, these are the things we believe in as an organization. Are you aligned to those? So let's start to document the business as a whole and just get, and because it's an existing business, let's get everyone involved in that documentation process so that now we've got a solid foundation to build on. And if there is any changes at the top in the future or anyone that comes in, they're coming into a known there's a whole lot of inertia around that organization. So one or two new people can't change it. If they try and make changes, they'll get resistance and pushback, and they'll be told, no, that's not the way to do it. Here's the way we've agreed and understood it. You need to fit in with this. And you can, the style will dictate how that message is delivered. So you've documented it, you've got everyone to agreed. And so now it's set in tablets, so to speak, so that anyone coming in, we can have an induction program or an onboarding program to go, look, here's what we believe in, and here's our values, and therefore here's how we express those through various behaviors. Here's how we would expect you to behave in certain situations. And I imagine in your organization, there's a lot of risk management as well to be addressed.
Absolutely.
And so now you've got effectively the culture documented, and you've got some it's built on a solid foundation. The organization was moving ahead in that strong way. What was it that gave you comfort to go, hey, look, I think the business is now prepared. I think the business is now ready for me to exit again?
Well, what happened next was looking into it further, once we had all of that in place and we had some really solid foundations, there was still the very practical problem of how does a nonprofit, an international nonprofit in Vietnam, find a new CEO? It's harder than you might imagine, and you probably can imagine how hard it is. On salary, we can't be very competitive with industry. We're talking about a job where we're dealing with human trafficking, with court cases, with homeless kids, dealing with the police, all in the context of Vietnam, where NGOs are highly regulated. And so we could see that rather than just saying, look, we're going to find one CEO to replace Michael, let's take some steps. So what we did first was we created a co-CEO structure. We added a second CEO, and we divided up our work very clearly. Now, by the way, many people who hear about this their first reaction will be to say, I've never heard of that working. Well, now you have, because our co-CEO model really was well designed, and we got the right two people in the job, me and an Australian woman named Skye McConaughey. Then COVID hit, by the way, shortly after that. and our co-CEO model absolutely came into its own. Without it, I don't know what we would have done. Sky was able to take care of one entire side of the organization. I didn't have to think about it. I took care of the other. And because of that, we thrived. Blue Dragon actually grew during COVID because we were able to respond to the massive needs that developed here. We were out delivering food out on the streets. We were paying people's bills. We were breaking every curfew rule that there was to get help to people. One of our staff was even delivering, I think, on two different occasions, delivered a baby because the mother couldn't get to hospital. So the co-CEO model just absolutely worked well for us during COVID. And then came the next step, which was to say, right, we've got two CEOs. Now, what if I'm not one of them? And we then did a recruitment process internally and found another person, a Vietnamese man, who actually used to be a beneficiary. He was one of the first street kids who I helped 20 years ago. And he went off and had a career in hospitality. Then he came back to Blue Dragon. He was working first as a social worker, then in management. He became the co-CEO along with Sky, and I was able to step out. Now, doing it that way was very safe and gentle. And it's worth mentioning, by the way, that second time around when I said to the staff, right, we've got this idea, we're going to have a co-CEO model, straight away people were nervous because they were looking at me saying, you changed your role a few years ago and it went badly for everyone. Everyone was aware it was a toxic environment at the time. People were really nervous. The co-CEO model actually made it very safe for people. They could say, oh, okay, it's okay, Michael is still there. That's fine. The change isn't so big. And then everyone became very comfortable having two CEOs. It took a little bit of getting used to, but not as much as I had feared it would. Then when it came time for me to step out and another person took my role as the co-CEO, by then everyone's absolutely fine with it. So it created this very safe pathway. And now this co-CEO model, I'm a very big fan of it. And again, I know that I may be in a minority there, but it as a non-profit, it lets us get so much more done, and it meets our needs very well. It might not be for everybody, but it's working really well for us. And so with me then stepping out of the CEO role completely, it's almost like it didn't make that much of a difference to the organization. It's as though not many people even really noticed. And it became a real positive, in fact, that we had this great woman, Sky, and a great guy who's a former beneficiary. It became a real story of celebration rather than, oh no, what's going to happen this time with Michael stepping out of that role.
I can see, like, you probably saw my body language as well when you talk about the co-CEO, because it just terrified me. So I can, my mind, you've almost put me in a spin. But I'm thinking, I can see how that would work if there were clear lines of responsibility, because when everyone's responsible, no one's responsible.
That's
but if
right.
we said CEO 1 is responsible for this, and that's their mandate, and CEO number 2 is responsible for this, and that's their mandate. So then my mind goes, was there one CEO a little more senior than the other CEO? And in which case, labels are what we take out to the marketplace. And what's really important is the functional responsibilities we have inside the organization. And if everyone's really clear on who's responsible to what and who do I go to for what, then that's the key.
Yeah, that's right. And we do have it very clearly defined. Although I find that over time, as when I was a co-CEO and now, the roles do evolve kind of naturally. At the start, maybe one of the CEOs has a particular interest in the people and culture department instead of calling it HR. but then over time they might think, actually, I'd like to do something a bit different, and so the roles can be swapped around. And I would emphasize too that the co-CEO model, like I say, may not be for everyone. For us, we're an international NGO, so the Australian government looks at us as an Australian NGO, and we have to follow Australian law. And we receive money from the UK and from Australia, from the USA. We have to meet laws from multiple countries, but we're doing all of our work in Vietnam. So we also have to follow Vietnamese culture and traditions very, very closely. And so having a Vietnamese and a foreign CEO together actually makes perfect sense for us. It's almost a job that would be impossible otherwise. I don't see how we could find one person who could do everything that's required for an organization like Blue Dragon.
Wow, Michael, what a great story. We've had a crack. We've gone out. We've left the organization, seen that it didn't work, had the courage to come back, sort out, fix our mistakes, swallow our pride, so to speak, rebuild, learn along the way, rebuild, lay the foundations, look after everyone involved in the organization, all your sponsors, your stakeholders, the people who have got an ownership through alignment in the organization. It's a great show of leadership from what I can see, and courage even to jump in and do it again and fix up all those things that you didn't get right the first time round. You've now stepped out. It's humming along nicely without you. There's just one last question from me, and that's, out of this whole story, what's the one key message you really want listeners to take away from our conversation today?
Organizational readiness. There's so much that you can do to get an organization ready for that transition. I mentioned that one of the documents we developed is a succession plan. I've never been a big fan of documents until this tragedy happened some years ago, and I realized the value and the power of them. We've got a great succession plan. It's not a plan that says, if Michael goes, then this is the person to step in. It's not, it's not like the North Korean replacement plan. It's a plan that says, how do we prepare for any senior leader to leave? What do we have to do to make sure that if one of our key people walks out the door tomorrow and doesn't come back, that it's as okay as possible? And if I walk out the door tomorrow and never come back, of course there's an impact. You can't absolutely neutralize it and say, it's all just moving parts now, and anyone can just easily be replaced. But you have to think about, what does an organization lose if that person leaves? What's the knowledge? What are the relationships, the skills? And so knowing that, how do we prepare and be ready for all of it? Don't wait until someone says, I'm thinking about retiring, before you get ready, because the process of getting ready doesn't end. There's not a point where you put your feet up and say, well, it's all good now. Succession is all planned. Anyone can leave, anything can happen, and we're fine. It's ongoing, but it strengthens your organization no end. Blue Dragon is so much stronger than we were before, because we have everything in place. And I only wish I had done this, 10 years ago. I really hope that other people can learn from my mistake instead of having to learn from their own mistake like I did.
So we're looking for the gold standard, where all of the institutional knowledge of the organization doesn't reside in just one person's head. It's across the organization, and ultimately we document as much as we can to the right level of detail for the organization.
Yeah, that's right. So one simple example for us, of course, we rely on fundraising. So relationships with people around the world who donate money. If if those relationships are all just with me, the founder, and then one day I'm gone, that's a major calamity for the organization. So we always make sure that at least one other person also has a relationship with our donors. And that's got to be, it then becomes messy because we've got lots of different donors in lots of different countries. And we need to make sure that they've got a connection with somebody, not just with one person in Blue Dragon. It's not easy, but it's absolutely vital for the future.
That's great advice for everyone. Michael, hey, really appreciate you sharing your exit insights with us today.
I'm pleased to. I did go through a terrible time back then, and it was unnecessary. So I think the idea of talking about exit is key to long-term happiness and to the success of organizations.